So this session is primarily about essence of sound design for IPs and brands, and the topic is pretty heavy, I know. Uh, the idea is that when we are working on the technicalities of audio, like I said, there's a lot of research happening, there's a lot of work happening in the audio domain. Often we tend to get carried away from the reason or the art itself, right? And my main attempt in this session is to bring all of that back, just to give you a recap of why you might be in this domain in the first place. And that's what we will do with the essence. The second, I mean, the if I just read the title again, it is Essence of Sound Design for IPs and Brands. So, essence of sound is what we will focus on first. Then we'll go and do some observations and understand how that can be implemented in sound design. And then we will touch upon what IPs and brands really mean and what we can do with our learning in that regards. So, a quick note about me so that you understand there is a reason why I'm giving a talk, and also it should give you some clarity about why you should like spend the next few minutes to like around 45 minutes to listen to me uh, based on the background that I have. So first things first, my name is Prashant. It's pronounced as Prashant. These slides will be available later on, and there is this hyperlink that you can access to really understand how to pronounce the name correctly. It basically means the Pacific Ocean. So yeah, it's a huge name, I guess. And I am listening. This is generally a tagline I have started using for almost like 4 or 5 years now, where anytime I meet someone and they ask me what I do, I generally tell I am listening. And the reason is because I am doing that. So apart from me listening, I am an audiophile. I consider myself an audiophile in the sense that I like enjoying listening to everything around me, whether it's the nature, whether it's music, whether it's sound design, whether it is anything that basically can be audible. I love to listen. I love to listen on different devices. I just admire the fact that we live on a planet where this is possible, where there is an atmosphere, there is a medium, and we have the ears to then capture all of those vibrations in the air and help us like enjoy that. In the past, I have worked as an audio director for educational games and videos, and one of the collaboration was with Disney's. So I have worked on a lot of Disney IPs end to end for games and educational videos, and these IPs include Frozen, Lion King, Toy Story, and a lot more. And that's also one of the phase in my life when I really started understanding sound beyond the technicalities. When I started exploring sound design from an emotions and a human perspective. In the past, I have also set up audio teams and scale startups, which is where I kind of experimented on how do I convey my ideas to other people. So that's all about the past. As of now, I am building audio products with Soundly, the great team at Soundly. I hope like some of you might know about that. I'm also helping the School of Video Game and Audio to build and grow their games and interactive audio community. It's a great platform to learn game audio, learn middleware, game engines, and all of that. And as an attempt to make sure that there is an ecosystem of game audio in India, I am currently working on GameAudio.in, which some of you might be aware of. But the idea is to scale this up in the future. Apart from that, I am a vice certified instructor, and one of the attempts that I have been doing for the past few months is I am kind of trying to build a game audio mindset. It's not just the skills, but rather a mindset of game audio among different stakeholders. Not like, for example, when you talk about game audio, the first thing that comes in mind is technical sound designers and sound designers. But from my experience, what I have learned is that working in just a bubble of audio sometimes does not work in our favor if other stakeholders are not on the same page. So, for example, the writers, the game producers, developers, game designers, if they have some clarity about game audio and have a mindset, it becomes easy for us to convince them to build a feature, for example. So that's what I'm doing as of now. A quick disclaimer what about this session. First things first. I mean, I have told you about what I'm doing right now and what I've done in the past, but I still say that I'm as much a learner as you are, and I'll I'll spend like a few minutes on this topic because I think it's very relevant. In my opinion, designation tags are not very relevant. Uh, there is junior sound designer, senior sound designer, and all of those roles in different companies, and they have their own purposes from a human resource standpoint, from a skill set and experience standpoint, and all of that. But what I've generally noticed is that I have met people who are 30, 40 years experienced, but have kind of lost the vision of why they're working on something. And at the same time, I have met people who are in their early 20s and who understand game audio and brands and IPs far better than do those older people, right? And I'm not against anyone here. I am also turning old. I am also transitioning towards that other domain. However, I think it's important to point this out because a lot of times people who are just starting out in game audio specifically hold themselves back from experimenting just because they think that they are junior, right? Or they are new to this domain. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important to point out that even if you're working in this industry for decades, it will be helpful if you have a learner mindset with you. And I take pride in writing this sentence here, and I hope that I'll be able to maintain it in the future. But yeah, I'm just as much a learner as you are, which means whatever you listen to today, whatever ideas I present today, some of them might seem subjective. And I think it's completely okay. Because what my intention is to initiate a discussion. This presentation is primarily a beginning and not a conclusion. I'm not saying that these are the points that you should use when you're planning about an essence of sound or when you're working on an IP or a brand or something like that. All I'm here to tell is that, hey, have you thought about this? And that's about it. The other thing is, which I think I should mention, is that I will be quoting a few legends who I look up to, and they don't know about it. I mean, of course, they haven't not seen this presentation yet, and maybe in the future they'll get to know, oh, this person has quoted them on it. But I hope that they will be okay with it. And whatever I'm quoting is already in public domain, so I'm not like taking any IP or something like that. Other thing I think I should mention is that in this session, I'm not going to be using any audio application. Uh, I know there is a lot of people here. There are a lot of people here. There's a lot of scope of doing some brand placement and all of that, but I'm not going to talk about any audio application, and you will understand why so in a few slides. The other thing is I'm not going to play back any audio files because this session is a BYOI. Bring your own imagination. So my idea is that I will tell you a story. I will take you through a journey in which you all will be participating. And as I speak, as I present some ideas, feel free to imagine. And I'm not talking about imagining the visuals. I'm talking about imagining sounds because we will be touching upon the past. We'll talk about philosophy a lot. We'll talk about life, and we'll talk things beyond sound. And the reason I wanted to mention this point in this session is because art is something that is a representation of a human's journey through his life, his or her life, right? Maybe we are just starting out in our career. So we are learning the tools. Our focus is primarily on the tools. But while we are doing so, we are also consuming a lot of art. We are watching a lot of movies. We are playing a lot of games. We are listening to a lot of music, a lot of sound design. And in some way, all of those experiences that we do outside of work influence our perception about what we will then create the next day. And I think those are the major points that I wanted to mention before we jump into the session. If you want to make the best use of this talk, make sure, if you can, at this point of time, grab a pencil or a pen and a notebook or a piece of paper. I know I should have informed about this in advance, but don't worry, it's not like you're going to miss out on something. It's just that I want to do some exercise that we can do hands on, and this will help. And there's actually a story that I want to tell, which you all will be a part of, in which I will be using a pen and pencil on my own. So I thought, why not let you also do that? Or you can just take any note taking device and just write down there, because we will be doing some sessions, some questions, and some interactions about it. At the same time, because I have like 45 minutes more to this talk, please do active listening. And by active listening, I mean you are paying attention not just to what I'm speaking, but also imagining while I'm speaking them. And at the end, make sure to use the chat section as much as possible. Keep posting the notes so that everybody else can also see what your standpoint is, what your vision is, and all of those is. The other thing that I would like to encourage is think outside the constraints of technicalities. For example, if we a point comes up in this discussion which you know personally that it's not possible in any game audio engine or a middleware or a DAW, it's okay. When we have to think something, we can just think of it. So let's not constrain ourselves based on the existing technology, because who knows, within the next couple of years that will also exist. And finally, please make sure to live in the moment so that we all can have fun. Now, enough about me and about the disclaimer and all of that. Let's get to know you. So please take a moment and just write in the chat, what is your favorite sound? It could be anything. It could be a music track. It could be a background score of a movie. It could be a new song. But it could be also be a specific, like a 0.5 seconds of sound effect. It could be your doorbell, which is new and shimmery and all of that. So yeah, we'll just take like a few, like 30 seconds or something, just to see what everybody mentions in the chat. And while you're doing that, let me just give you a quick context of where this question is coming from. A few years ago, I decided that I want to connect with as many people as I can, not to tell them what my perception is, but to learn what theirs is. Because what I've realized is sound and art in general is a very subjective thing. And often what happens is if we design something and we like what we have designed, generally it's obvious. We tend to like what we are creating. But from other person's point of view, that might not be as good as we think it is, right? So what I decided to do is that whenever I connect with somebody, and if any of you have connected with me through Calendly or something like that, you would notice that I always ask this question about what is your favorite song? Because when you take a pause and think what's happening in your life and tell me through a form that this is the your specific favorite sound, it's actually telling a lot about you. It's actually telling what you're going through, maybe what you are facing at this point of time in your life. And if you notice, if you fill this form again and again over the years, the answers will change. I have met people who once felt that they like the Moog synthesizer sounds as their favorite sound, and after a year later, their answer had changed, and they were kind of working too much into the Foley recording domain, so they were liking a lot of bird sounds at that time. And I was like, okay, so this is how the person has journeyed in their lives. So all right, so there are a lot of interesting answers in the chat. A long pipe lit with a mallet. Okay, that's interesting. Birds, I think, is one of the most common answers that we see. Wind, I think wind is the best answer. I mean, in my opinion, the reason is that we generally focus on wind only when we listen to it in the recordings, right? When we are, like, say, next to an ocean, we focus on the sound of the waves, but we are not really focusing on the wind sound, unless we take the hand recorder and then we start recording the seagulls, for example. And when we have to edit the sound, we are like, why is there so much wind in this recording? So I think, yeah, I mean, wind is a pretty interesting answer there. Halo Energy Sword, yeah, that's, I think, also one of the most famous one. Last one, a bass slap. All right, so there is a lot of there are a lot of answers in the chat, and I think that kind of gives you and also me some clarity about where you're coming from. Some of the audience members have mentioned things about game sounds that they have probably recently played or they have played in the past and they like it, or maybe they are so much into the in the gaming domain that that's one of the examples that they immediately think of. Other people who might have done some Foley recording or post-production work might be giving some examples from the ambiences and all of that. So I think the answers vary. But here's a task for you, if you will. Maybe after a week or maybe after a month, just set a reminder and see what your answer is at that point of time. Has it changed? Do you still like that specific sound from a specific game, or have you found another one? And I will touch upon this at the later part of the session, where I will tell you some best practices that you can use to develop your understanding about the essence of sound. But yeah, I think I kind of I got to know some of you, and I think you all got to know each other as well. So let's get to story time. And we will be revisiting childhood, and really understanding how we learn something. And while I'm saying all of this, it might at some point feel like I'm distracting away from the topic, but I'll be coming back, so you don't have to worry about it. But let's just start with the pencil. If you all were able to get a pen or pencil or something like that, let's start remembering how we learned how to write. And I'm pretty sure none of you remember that from your own childhood, but you can always take examples from kids who are learning around you, right? So generally what happens is a pen, which is basically a tool. Remember that a pen or a pencil is just a tool to write, right? So when this device is kept in front of the kid, the curiosity in the kid is for them to pick it up, because at that age they're grabbing everything, they are eating everything, they are just playing with toys and all of that. And then because they are in that mindset, when they see a pen or a pencil, this is how they grab it, right? They don't pick up the pen or pencil like this, like how we do when we are adults and when we are writing and all of that. When they are first experiencing this tool, they just grab it. And when you show them that you can use it to write something on a paper, this is how they grab. And then they start writing on a piece of paper, right? I hope my view here is clear enough. But yeah, so this is how they hold the pen or a pencil and they start writing like this. And as an audience, we kind of find it funny. I mean, some of you might find it funny, some of you might find it, okay, they are doing it the wrong way, let's just correct them. And as an elder around the kid, what you would eventually do is you will ask the kid to hold the pencil between their fingers, right? And then you will ask the kid to basically try it again. But because the kid's hands are so tiny that the pencil's weight or the pen's weight kind of makes it go back, and they're really not able to write it down. But eventually, on later that day or the second day or something like that, the kid gets the confidence to hold the pencil the right way and then starts writing. Or in some situations, like it happened in mine, the kid, in the absence of the parents, might realize that, you know what, if I hold it in my left hand, it is much more comfortable. And that's how lefties are born, by the way. Shout out to all the lefties in the chat here. Anyway, so what happens is when the kid basically understands that this is the pen and this is how you hold it, this is how you write, that's their journey into writing, right? What they're learning at that point of time is the tool, the software or the hardware that will let them express themselves in the future. But while they are focused too much on the pen, they're not really thinking about the ideas. They're focusing only and only on the device, on the software, the newly purchased software that they have bought, or the newly purchased hardware that they have bought, their favorite DOS, their favorite plugins, their favorite sound library and software, for example. The focus always stays for the new learner on the tool. But as they grow older, as they realize what they have, what the ideas that they have that they want to communicate to the world, that's when they start making the use of this tool to write things down. And that's where the essence really starts. Sound design in itself, yes, it requires technicalities. Yes, it requires you to learn a lot of tools and all of that. But eventually, we should always take a step back and remember, why did we start in the first place? What were the ideas that we always wanted to represent or express? And that's the reason I think I had to tell you this story. Now let's consider another kid who may or may not have a guardian or an elder person around them to nudge them about this. And those are the examples of self-learner. And in the audio domain, you would notice that there are a lot of people who have learned on their own. They did not necessarily go to a film school or a sound engineering school, but they made mistakes. They eventually wrote like this for the first time, and then they realized they're not getting the spelling. And then they saw somebody else writing it this way, and then they started writing, and eventually they figured it out. But telling that this is the only way to write is also not true, because you can really like it like this. When you are in trouble, you are stuck in the mountains and you have to write SOS on the mountain or a sand somewhere. This is how you would hold the rock or the stick or anything to carve what you really want to write, which means art and tools have some kind of independence with each other. And just because one person's point of view at that specific use case is making sense to you and everybody else does not mean their other point of view might not be valid. And this, I think, is an important aspect to remember as we go along to the next of the slides, because essence is not an easy thing to grasp. We all have experiences in our lives, but it's really tough to understand what in that experience can be an actual an essence. So I hope this story makes sense. If it's still not clear, why am I talking about writing with a pencil in a session about audio? Maybe in the few slides it will. So yes, it's important to remember that the pencil or a pen is just a tool. We are here to eventually tell the story that we have in all of our hearts, and the tool really is secondary, and what one has to say is what matters, right? And on that note, I think I'll just share a quote from you. You can actually try and make a guess in the chat if you can. I'll anyways reveal immediately. The quote is, art isn't in the tools, material, or equipment you use. It's in the way you see the world. And this quote is by Rick Rubin. He recently posted it on his Twitter. And I want you to focus on the later part. I think you have covered the first part with this story that I told, but the next part that is highlighted, which is art is in the way you see the world, is, I think, very important, especially when it comes to sound design. I think it's important for us to observe and experience the world around us. So let's actually quickly recap what sound is. Uh, Yes, for sure, Damien. Talent is definitely better than tools. All right. By the way, I'm not really checking the chat very often unless like I take a break between my paragraph. So don't think I'm skipping anything like that. I'll probably come to the chat later on. Yeah. So just let's revisit sound. It's basically the wiggling of airs. Sound is basically air wiggles, and air wiggles is sound. Yeah, I think this is also one of the philosophies that was mentioned. I think by Lewis or Greg at some point when this website was launched. But on a serious note, sound is basically just the vibrations of air reaching our ears, right? And we have all studied the physical characteristics of sound. That is what we start with. We all have started our journey with this specific sentence. And I'm pretty sure all of you can fill in the gaps. Frequency is perceived as dash, and amplitude is perceived as dash. And I think everyone in the chat box, if wants to just fill in the blanks about what the answer is, I think everybody knows that. I'll just take like a few seconds just to see if uh, everything is going well. Pitch and volume. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the answer. Yeah. So frequency is perceived as pitch and amplitude is perceived as loudness. And I think that's a very commonly talked about sentence when we talked about the physics of sounds. So congratulations on the correct answer there. But I like to think of sound as a living organism. And this is just a philosophy, by the way, but it will start to make sense as I speak, I hope. I tend to think of sound as something that is living. And while it's all just air movements reaching our ears and then our brain kind of understanding what it is, when we have to think about art side of things, it's important to get a little bit into philosophy. And how the way I like to think of sound is as a living organism, in the sense that it is basically reaching my ears and it has the ability to notify me about something. Hey, there is a doorbell, somebody's outside, or instill an emotion, or tell a story. And the beauty of audio and sound is that even if it's in its absence, it tells a story. For example, you are in a jungle and there are a lot of crickets and you are hearing all of the sounds, but all of a sudden the crickets just stop creating sound and there is complete silence. First things first, that's when you will notice that there were crickets in the first place. And the second thing is, it could mean a lot of things. From an evolutionary standpoint, it could mean danger, it could mean something else is around it. So, sound is basically an old friend of mine and of yours and of everybody else's that's basically helping us in our survival. And the way I kind of think of sound in this way is because it helps to then understand the kind of emotions, the kind of influences that it has on us in our day-to-day life. So let's get into essence. Now, the fact is, to figure out essence of something is not really easy. For example, We have all heard about the food essence, right? Where you have some kind of liquid which you add in your food, and then you get a taste of a specific fruit, for example, for apple, for oranges, and all of that. That's basically one essence. So that liquid has basically captured the specifics that kind of lets us know that, yeah, this exactly is uh, the substance that making us feel like this is orange or this is apple, right? But it's not very easy. And I think in this session, let's actually attempt to do some observations and kind of understand what essence really means in the first place. So let me take you to a philosophy of mirage. And this again is a question, so be prepared to answer it in the chat. It's a very common phenomena that happens in the desert and also on highways on a hot sunny day, where if we see far away, you will notice that there is some kind of water that's on the road, and that's basically mirage. And what happens is, from the physics of it, because of the differences in the refractive index of the air, the hot air and the cold air, the light undergoes a total internal reflection, and we basically see a reflection of what's above the ground under the ground, right? And that's basically the process, the physics behind the total internal reflection, which is why we see mirage. My question is slightly different. My question to you is, why do we assume that it's water? It could be anything, right? It could be mirror also reflects. It could be an aluminum foil that also reflects, we will probably see more or less the same visuals if it is far away and something is reflecting. Why do we specifically assume that the mirage is water? Like, why is that uh, an assumptions that our brain kind of is completely convinced about? And yeah, I mean, I'll just wait for a few seconds for some of you to just mention your point of view in the chat before I explain further. The brain interpreting it, pattern recognition. Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think what Greg mentioned, I think, is very close to what really happens. What I would kind of the way I like to portray this is, it's our past experiences that are influencing our current judgment. In the past, when we saw water on the floor, that's when we saw the reflection of the things around that puddle of water. So when the reverse happens, when we see the reflection of something around us, and it's happening on the same kind of surface area, we assume immediately that it's supposed to be water. Now let's understand what essence of something is. So when we experience something in real life that's happening around us, when the reverse of that happens, our brain kind of interprets as if the actual cause of the event actually was happening as well. And I think we should make use of this a lot in our sound design and actually prove it to you that it's already happening and you all know about it. You all have heard about it endless number of times. And yeah, we'll see that in action. But I hope this philosophy makes sense, that the essence is basically we experience something in real world and we try to capture bits of it to create an experience that gives an illusion to the audience that something else is happening. And on that note, I think I'll also recommend a book which is by an author called Edward Berger. The book is called Five Elements of Effective Thinking. And in that book, there is this paragraph which I absolutely love. And it's basically about how we capture an essence of something. And the paragraph says the examples of flying. Now, I'll just read this out. When we visualize flying of birds, we see flapping wings. But as anyone who has flown on an airplane will attest, flapping is not the essence of flight. It's the gentle curve of the top of the wing that matters. And this is an important aspect for us to understand if at all we are going to work with an IP, with a brand, especially if you are going to work on sonic branding and all of that, is that essence often is not the thing that is audible or visual directly. It could also be something hidden. And to really understand what's going on, we should do a lot of observations. So, on that note, let me take you to another example of essence. You would have noticed that in many videos editing, there's a very common technique that whenever we have to conclude the video, we just use fade to black. Now, my question is, why not fade to blue? Why not fade to red? Why not fade to green? Why is it that we generally see fade to black and we immediately feel satisfied that yes, the video has concluded. Why is it that fade to black is kind of giving us a feeling that yes, this thing has concluded? And I think I'll just to save some time, I'll just answer that question. The reason is when we see the world around us, we blink our eyes, right? And when we have to wrap up the day and take rest, we close our eyes. So, in our daily experience, closing of eyes, which is basically we see darkness, is in some way related to taking a break or concluding that specific day. And that same phenomena, when happens visually in a video editing, we immediately feel convinced that yes, this scene has ended. Maybe when the next scene starts, you will see a fade in, and that is also happening from complete darkness to light. That is again an equivalent of you waking up the next morning, opening your eyes, and starting a new day. So this again, it might seem trivial, but let's say you were one of the earliest person who had to decide, all right, my movie is short, how do I conclude it? And you decided, you know what, let's just fade to nothing. And that kind of immediately relates to everybody in the world, because whoever has the ability to see something immediately relates to it. So I think I've kind of put my point about what essence means. I've given some examples of what happens in our real life that we can use in our art and how that kind of relates. Again, I'm not saying this is the only way to do something. I'm not saying that I know everything. All I'm saying is, have you thought about it this way? So let's talk about the essence in sound and let's do some observation. So the question has to be asked, where have we heard in our life, what have we heard in our life that we can extract an essence of sound from? And for that, I'll have to ask all of you to use your phones and listen to the lock and unlock sound effect in your devices. And then I'll talk a little bit about this. If at all you're watching this session on your phone, I think when you lock your phone, you might end up leaving the session. But if you're using any other device, then I think you can try it out. One observation that you should make is that irrespective of which company the device is from, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a Samsung, Android, or whatever it is, you will notice that the sound of locking the phone goes from higher pitch to lower pitch. And when you unlock the device, the sound goes from a lower pitch to higher pitch. It does not matter what the sound is. It could be a mechanical sound, like for example, iPhone has a very mechanical sound. It actually sounds like a real lock. But there are different brands, for example, Motorola, which has some kind of a UI sound. But irrespective of what that sound is, as long as your phone is not muted, Sam, if you are listening to, and as long as your phone actually has a sound effect for locking and unlocking, I'm actually 100% sure that the sound for locking will always go from a higher pitch to a lower pitch, and the sound for unlocking will go from a lower pitch to higher pitch. Like for example, if I try to recreate the sound from my mouth, it would something be like, I don't know if it was audible, but yeah, so it will go tick tuk tuk tuk. And this is something that we see all across us. If you are using a home devices, for example, Alexa, Google Home, or Siri, or anything like that, anytime the device gets activated and is actively listening for your voice command, the sound effect that plays, if at all you have the sound effect active, will always go from a lower pitch to higher pitch. And then when the device stops listening to you, it goes from a higher pitch to a lower pitch. The essence here is that in our lives, when we hear something going up in pitch, it kind of gives us a feeling that something has opened. And if you don't believe me, take any glass jar and try to open the lid. And you will notice that when you open the lid, irrespective of how you are opening it, irrespective of how the movement of the cover of the lid with the glass is, especially if it's a metallic cover, no matter what the lid is, you will notice that eventually, whatever be the texture of sound, whatever be the frequency content of it, if you record it and see it in your any of the audio editor, you will notice that the pitch goes up in time, and when you close the jar, it basically goes pitch down with time. And because we are so used to this experience all around us, when you design the sounds for any UI, specifically things like phone lock and unlock, when you use this exact essence, everybody in the world feels that, yeah, this is how it should sound. It gives me the exact feel. So this is another example of how you can actually listen to the sounds around you and kind of extract the essence. And again, like I said, it's not always easy to figure out what that essence is. Sometimes that essence could be the dynamics, sometimes it could be the pitch or anything of that sort. So what the way I like to think of is, when I, as an exercise, the way I like to do is, when I'm listening to something around me, specifically it is a one shot sound or something like that, I try to just take a pen and pencil and I kind of draw a specific waveform on my notepad. And my attempt is to kind of feel the sound when I'm drawing it. Like if at all the sounds went something like, which was a low volume at the in the starting with a lower pitch, and slowly the volume and the pitch increases, I would kind of then understand what does it make me feel. Does it sound like that something has started? Does it sound like something has ended, or is it like neutral? And what is the energy movement that's happening? So all of those questions you can ask by doing this one of the exercise, which is think of a sound or listen a sound and draw it using just lines so that it ends up looking like a waveform without you actually listening to it, without you actually taking it into your audio software, for example, just as an experiment, just so that you understand how the sound around you is behaving. So, like I said, the to really understand why a specific sound makes us feel a specific way could be for a variety of reasons. Some things could be because of the way the sound's rhythm is. For example, let's say if I ask you to imagine a drop of water landing into, for example, a pond, what is the sound that comes in your head? For some of you, that drop might have just fallen and then become a part of the pond itself. For the rest of you, the situation might be different. Maybe you imagine the sound falling on that water and then spilling a little bit and then settling down. For some of you, you might be imagining that the water surface is pretty shallow and then you hear some other sound. My point is, what a specific sound means to you, how it sounds to you, can be affected by a lot of things. And to really understand and to capture the essence, we might have to do a lot of observations. Dynamics and rhythm is one option. The time and frequency content is another option. For example, if the audio has a lot of bass content, it will feel like it's a heavy object, and so on and so forth. The texture, the sonic content of the sound itself, and the relative things that are happening in this. So, for example, in the example I told about phone locking and unlocking, the pitch is going from a low pitch. The sound is going from a low pitch to a higher pitch, and because that movement is happening, you kind of feel that yes, something is getting unlocked. And similar to how emotions are, sound also has the ability to convey specific or different experiences for us. For example, one person's moment of sadness is in contrast to what they have felt to the rest of their lives, right? If at all they are told about somebody else's problems that are much worse than theirs, they might feel a little bit better. The same thing happens in sound. Unless and until you have a contrast going on, it's very tough to really communicate to the audience what your sound is doing. Uh, the best example would be the melody of the sound, the pitch going up and pitch going down. And then there are a lot of other factors that basically influence the essence of sound. And what I would like to do is for you to experiment and just write down what you think influences the sound. Why do you feel something sounds like it is reminding you of a specific moment in life, or giving you a feel of, oh, this is a happy moment, oh, this is a sad moment? And figure out what essence, what element of sound is making you feel that way. All right. So yes, contrast something I've talked about, and I think everybody here knows about the fact that consistent noise is no noise, which is basically psychoacoustic effect that happens where if you are listening to something for a longer time, our brain kind of ignores it unless that sound basically goes away. These are just examples of how you can understand the essence of sound based on the things that you listen around you. Now let's quickly, now that we have covered a lot of things about sound and how we perceive it, what are the different aspects of it and how that relate to us emotionally, let's quickly jump into IPs and brands. And there is a lot of discussion that happens. There are a lot of definitions that you will find. IP is basically the short form for intellectual properties. But I think in essence, they're all just stories. Whether you're working on a Disney movie, or you're working on a Marvel IP, or you're working on any of the new devices that are coming in, for example, at the end of the day, IPs and brands are just stories. So what really helps when we are working on a specific brand or an IP is first to define a story. And I think this is something that I learned a lot when I was working on the Disney games, is that the better you have your story defined, the better you have the environment, the characters, what they can do, what they cannot do, what happens in that world defined, the easier it becomes for you to then design the soundscape and everything around it. Especially if at all you are somebody who did not write the brand's story or IP story, I would suggest that you still try and make an effort to understand it. And this is something that rarely happens in, I mean, especially in indie companies, that does not happen as much, because the audio department generally stays isolated from the rest of the departments. So what I would suggest you to do is sit with the writers, sit with the directors, and understand what is the story that the brand wants to communicate. And I think it's important to remember that when you define a story, it does not mean you're putting constraints. It just means that you have a lot more opportunity. For example, let's say you're working on an IP that's about uh, something that is meant for an age group of 8 to 12, right? In that case, you will try and avoid something that is like an A-rated content, for example. However, you have a lot more opportunity within that age group's preferences that you can experiment with. The definition is just giving you direction. It's not putting constraints on you. The other thing that I would mention is ask questions. If at all you're not clear about what that IP represents, what that brand represents, get in touch with the stakeholders and really understand what is it that they want to communicate. What does it represent? Sometimes, for example, some movies or some games, their main long-term agenda would be a victory. Or if it's a sequel, it might be a revenge. For example, a character did not succeed in the first version of the game, and in the second version is where that catharsis moment is going to come. All of those aspects can be used in the way you approach the sound design and the music. You can plan in advance. You can start giving hints about what's yet to come, and that will happen only if you understand the overall long-term vision of that specific story moment, which is basically an IP or a brand. And what another tactic that I like to do is basically to attach adjectives to those moments. As is this story, is this brand, is this IP eventually going to make me feel happy? Happy also has a variety of things: excited, overexcited, especially if it's something like, for example, meant for a holiday season. Is it an extravaganza? Or if it is a neutral thing, how neutral is it? Is it like meant for somebody who's just passing time? Is it meant for a hyper casual game, for example? What does it represent? So using adjectives and keeping a check on what that whole theme of the game or the theme of the IP or a brand or the story is definitely helps a lot. And I think this also eventually comes down to the practice of creating mood boards, that you kind of have a clarity about what your vision was, and you always keep a check on that. Because believe it or not, when you get to sound design, when you get into your DAW, we often kind of tend to move away from the main agenda. For example, we might be focused too much on the frequency content. Why is this not sitting in the mix? Why is it sounding too harsh? Oh, I recorded this specific sound. It has a lot of top frequency content. But you know what? Maybe that's required. Maybe we don't have to really remove and make everything sound pleasant. Maybe we don't have to compress everything at a consistent level, because maybe the IP or the brand or the story that we're working on requires that. So going back to the mood boards definitely help that happen. And learn from good examples. Make sure that you have good references. Make sure that you have witnessed and experienced good movies, good soundscapes in your life, so that when you work on something, you have that taste, and you're bringing that taste to the table. And I think it's important to understand that we need to think beyond sonic branding. And I'm pretty sure that when some of you read the title of the session, that is about sound design for IPs and brands, some of you might also have thought, is it going to be about sonic branding? Are we going to understand how do we design sounds like the Intel logo sounds or the THX, something like that? And I would say sonic branding is a part of the overall brand. If you have a major story to tell, you can always figure out what sound from that whole story makes sense to be communicated to the users in a short period of time, right? And that brings me to the actionable items. We have talked about a lot of philosophy in this session. We have talked about a few examples from a real life situation and how it matters and how it connects with the sound design approach. So, what can we do that will help us upgrade our taste? First thing that I would highly recommend is start journaling. By journaling, what I mean is when we sit in a room, for example, or you travel to, you do a trekking, you reach the top of the mountain. Often we tend to take a rest and then just listen to the world around us, right? What's happening? Are there ambiances? Are there birds in this area? Are there animals in this area? Are there tourists who are chattering and making noise and all of that? But what I would suggest is figure out what those soundscape made you feel, because at the end of the day, no matter what tool you're using, if at all you don't create a soundscape that matches and catches attention of the audience, it's really not worth it, right? Maybe your mix is super polished, maybe your guitar, your bass, and your drum tech never ever clash with each other, the frequency is spot on. However, if at all it's not telling the story, is it really worth the effort? I would also recommend that you start listening beyond the sound. And I think this is something that I wanted to give you as an example at the end of the session, but I'll do it right away because we have less time, which is how many of you have stood in traffic and really enjoyed the sound? I know traffic means a lot of honking, maybe possibly people shouting at each other, especially if it is like jam packed and all of that. But I would kind of nudge you that for once in life, take a moment, especially if you are in this chaotic situation, maybe stand in a corner and just enjoy that soundscape. And the reason is very important. Sound designer is an artist, similar to how an actor is. An actor might be required to do a lot of things in a movie, right? They might be playing the main protagonist in some movies, but in some other movies they might have to play a role of somebody else. If you have watched Breaking Bad, for example, Mike is a good example of a character that is tough to judge whether that character is a good person or a bad person. But if you see from that actor's standpoint, they have to do something in that movie which actually has to be good as well as bad from an ethical standpoint and all of that. So my point is, if in our lives so far whatever we have lived, if we have not really experienced the soundscape of a traffic, how on earth would we be able to design that in our movies, in our games, in the actual life scenario? We will be so tempted to compress the sound because it is sounding too loud, because we have not actually experienced it, and that will just take away the whole essence of it. So maybe experiencing the sounds, remembering that this is only happening on this planet Earth, where there is a medium that can make the all the air wiggling to reach our ears and for us to experience it. Maybe the best way to learn is to actually experience that. So I would suggest to listen beyond the sound, beyond what's happening, see how it makes you feel, try and discuss things in word. And I think this helps in the sense that when you put something to words, it first thing is gives you clarity about how you were actually feeling. At the same time, when you have to communicate to somebody else in your work, for example the audio director or maybe an animator or an editor, for example, it becomes easy for you to explain what you're feeling with that. And see, as an experiment in your surroundings, maybe everybody's like from different part of the world, right? What is that one sound that you can take away right now, and then if you close your eyes and listen to the environment around you, you will be convinced that you are not at at that location. So it could be anything. My point is to just nudge you to maybe experiment it once in a while to actually see what you feel. The other thing that I think is an important actionable, which already is happening throughout YouTube these days, is review. Showreel reviews is one of the biggest thing that's happening, and I want to nudge the new learners to do that, because review is not just about telling the other person that hey, this is not sounding good, not sounding bad. What you're actually telling the other person is, hey, from my point of view, this sounds a little harsh. But if you read other people's reviews or other people's point of view, then you might realize that, you know what, I think I have to change my mind here. Because yeah, I also maybe at that point of time my headphone levels were something different, I was listening to something in the background, and then I was listening to this video or audio, and that's why I had that perception, but my perception has changed. So I think review is the one of the best ways to understand the essence of this sound design and how you can improve your perception about it. And one of the best exercises that I have recommended to a lot of people who have taken workshops with is the next time when you record a sound, don't record a sound of, for example, a keychain. Challenge yourself to record a happy sound. It could be using anything around you. It could be using your phone. It could be using any metal object that you have lying down around you. It could be through anything. But at the end of the day, it should sound happy. And again, going back to the point number one, don't just assume that because you feel that sound is happy, everybody else will. Record that sound, send it to somebody else, and make them listen and say, hey, does this sound like something that is happy? And again, it doesn't have to be like a cartoon sound or a giggle of a kid. It could be anything. It could be as subtle as picking up the cup from the table. Even that can be happy. And the more you experiment, the more you will get to know about it. Because I have only have 5 minutes left, I have to rush through it now. But I'm happy to discuss more on this if you would like to on a one-on-one session, for example, and I'll give the links at the end of the session. And again, yeah, I'm just repeating myself here. Make sure that you test the recordings with somebody else. See if somebody else also feels the same way that you felt when you recorded this sound. I think a few more suggestions is to understand animation. A lot of times, audio folks tend to learn everything in their bubble, but then they kind of not learn what every other department does. So I think I would highly recommend learning what Bezier curves are. The keywords that I use visually, ease in, ease out, fade in, fade out, because these also influence the essence of sound design. How? If at all an animator comes and tells you, or a brand comes and tells you that, you know what, because our brand is so good and because we want our users to feel like there is a big impact coming their way whenever they see our logo, the animation is spot on, like it immediately comes on the screen. And then the animator might use some words like it has it's easing in or it's easing out or something like that. Your sounds dynamics will have to follow that if you really want to capture that essence, if you really want to make the user feel like yes, that brand feels and sounds that. So these keywords definitely helps, and make sure to break the rules. I think I just mentioned a few moments ago that maybe your mastered file is really good in terms of the mix from a technical standpoint, but maybe it's not supposed to be. If you and I are talking to each other and there is a whistling, say a pressure cooker is making some sound, definitely my voice and your voice, some of the frequencies will get masked, and it is supposed to be. So you don't always have to make the sound be pleasant as long as your essence is intact. So on that note, I'll just do a quick quote from one of my favorite sound designers. And the quote is, a sound with character, minimally processed, beats a characterless sounds, twisted crazily to try to make it cool. Find good sounds. That's sound design. And it is a quote by Randy Thom. So a few more suggestions on the good practices. Document whatever you listen around you. Try and document in words. When you have to communicate something to somebody else, don't send the samples next time. Send a paragraph. Let them figure out what you want to communicate, especially if it's a sound designer. See if you are able to convey the essence. Get out of the bubble of audio departments, which just means discuss ideas with everyone. Every stakeholder matters. If you are designing a sound and it does not work with the story, it might as well be just added to a library and not be used in a specific brand or a game or a movie. And let yourself free. Just experiment as much as possible. So a food for thought that I already mentioned, traffic, traffic, traffic. Go and listen to the traffic, enjoy it. It's okay to get bothered by it, but just listen to it so that from your experiences, in your life's experience, you know how it sounds. Exactly like what happens in Mirage. Because you have experienced a puddle of water on the floor, you know that it could be water. That is the illusion that you want to give to your audience whenever you design the sounds. And that can happen only and only if you yourself have experienced those things in your life. Remember that sounds have life beyond the visuals. Just because something has disappeared from the screen does not mean its sound has to go away as well. Remember, sound is a living organism. Think of it that way, that might help. And something that I have used a lot of times is objectivity is nothing but subjectivity accepted by the majority. If whatever I told here, some of you might relate, some of you might not. And I'm completely okay with that because I want this thought process to scale up. I want more and more people to understand that, hey, before we get into the door, before we take or get into the mix, or after we have done and completed our project and we are about to submit, let's just take and really enjoy the sound, really understand if it is conveying the theme of the story of the brand or the IP that it's supposed to. And if you're able to convince most people, your opinion will be kind of considered objective. And like I always say, zero point 0.5 seconds is enough to tell a story. And I can prove that to you with many examples, but it's lack of time, so I'll have to wrap in a few seconds. But yeah, challenge yourself that you will record a happy sound today, or a sad sound, or a thrilling sound. And maybe you will do a bunch of recordings, select the best takes, and then figure out which take sounded like, yes, it is communicating that story. And it could be like a 0.5 second sound as well, and send it to your friends, see if they are convinced that, yeah, this is what it feels. So do you still have that pencil or a pen? If you were experimenting with that, write something with it. The handwriting is your personality you have curated over the years, and that's what essence of sound design is. The experiences that you have lived through is what will show up in the things that you work on. And over the years, as you get more and more experience, your personality will start creeping in as well now and then. And it's completely okay too. And that will be your IP. So I would recommend you to polish it. What next? AI, Apple Vision Pro, and more. The reason I mentioned this here is because anything that happens for the VR platform has to be something that happens in the real life. You In stereo, we were doing a lot of hacks. We were panning things around. In Dolby Atmos, for example, we moved the synthesizer left and right randomly, even though if at all it was a physical human being playing a synthesizer, they will not be running around. But we do so because psychoacoustically, if you move things around, it kind of gives you a feel that something is moving, and it adds that dynamic. When you have to work on spatial audio, excuse me, when you have to work on things like VR and all of that, you will have to make sure that the sounds that you add, each and every source of sound, is as realistic, as meaningful as possible. So all of these will help out if you really understand what the essence is, what it really means. So now it's your turn. I hope this session made some sense. I know it was heavily philosophical, but I'm pretty sure watch this again after 2 years and it will start to make sense. Thank you so much for listening. I hope everybody is still there. And please make sure, I mean, I'm still around, so ask me any questions as you want. And you can also, the slides and all of the other things that I have mentioned will be available in this link, prashantmishra.xyz/aircon23. And like I said in the starting, this session is not a guidebook of how to work on IPs or what a sound essence of sound is. I'm not claiming that I know everything. All I'm saying is, let's have a discussion. I want to know what your thoughts are, what you think about sound, how you experience it, what sound makes you feel happy and sad. And I'm very happy. I'm excited if you could send me some samples and we can talk more about you. All right. With that, I'll say thank you. If there are any questions, I'll just take it from the chat. I hope you all can stay and just mention some of your thoughts. All right. Looks like everybody has kind of agreed with the essence that I wanted to communicate. So yeah, again, like I mentioned, I'll post this link in the general sections of Airwiggles as well. So in case you want to reach out, we can always have a discussion. Any good recommendations for reading materials in terms of direction and psychology? There are two things that I mean, one thing is that there are not many resources that have consolidated information, but one of the books that I have read, that I have heard recently as an audiobook, is How to Write One Song. And I think it's by Jeff. I'm forgetting the full name of the author, but the book is about what can you do in your daily life that will help you write one song. And while it might seem like it's a productivity book, it's actually a very philosophical book, and it actually touches upon a lot of approach to creativity. For psychoacoustics, I'll definitely look into something and I'll post it on Airwiggles as soon as I find something that's good enough. But until that happens, I would just recommend you to listen and get into journaling. I am pretty sure within a week's of time, you will notice your own version of psychoacoustics book going on. All right, Sam has mentioned that there is a talk about neuroscience and sound design. Sam, please do share it with me as well. It will definitely be of great help. Any other questions? I'll just maybe wait for a minute more. Okay, is this something you always thought about since you were a beginner, or do you got this conclusion after lots of experience with sounds? Because I see a lot of beginners focus only on the technical side. I think Betna is a very good point, and which is why I wanted to do this talk in the first place. What generally happens is when we start out, like I gave the example of the pencil as a kid, we focus on the craft. And I think it's completely okay to do so, because if we don't know how to write, for example, with our hands, then it's no point whatever great ideas we have in our minds, right? So working on the craft is definitely a very important thing to do. For me personally, when I started working on the Disney projects, that's when I got a lot more insights, because I decided to take a step back. I was learning software day in and day out. I was spending like almost 6 7 hours a day to learn new techniques and new shortcuts and all of that. And then I decided, you know what, let me just see how I feel, because I had to work on the IPs and I had to come up with some strategy to make that happen. And I cannot do it if I myself cannot experience sounds in that way. Which is why I often mention that I'm listening. So I am when I'm listening to, for example, a car passing by with a very high speed, I I judge a lot of things about the sound of the horn. I kind of speculate what might be happening in that person's life, just to make sure that maybe when one day I have to work on a film where that similar situation happens, I will know how it actually sounds, how people press the horn in their vehicles, for example. What is the succession of that sound that happens, right? So yes, to answer your question, it happened after I decided to take a step back. And I feel the earlier you do that, the better it will be, because then you will be learning the technical side of things while also remaining in the craft and art, right? I hope that answered your question. Uh, yeah. Any other questions? The science behind. All right. I think Abdullah has also mentioned a book. It's called Voice Leading: The Science Behind a Musical Art by David Huron, especially the eighth chapter, if I remember correctly. Okay. That's good. What sound brings you joy? Like I said, this answer will always change for everyone. For me, at this point of time, I have started to like the startup sound of Mac. And I started liking it even more when I heard the spatial audio version of it in the Vision Pro, the device. Because when I was used to listening to it on the Mac Mini, which does not really create the bass frequencies, and then I heard it on the new MacBook Pro, and then I felt so at home when that I heard the bass part of that same sound effect, and then when I heard the spatial version of it, it's at a whole new level. The sound comes from the front of you and then it slowly moves behind you, and it's a very satisfying sound. And I mean, I have had discussions with some people about why they like that startup sound and why they don't like the startup sound, and how it is too minimal, it's just one chord pitched down and all of that. At the end of the day, if a sound can connect you with a brand, like the startup sound of Mac immediately lets you know this is Apple. And if that sound over the years becomes more and more pleasant to hear, I mean, that's a great example of essence of sound kicking in, right? It's interesting how bass affects the feel of things. Yes, exactly. And also absence of bass. This is one of the good experiments that you can also try. Give the bass to the audience in the start, then take it away for some time, especially when your game or your story is going slightly intense. And whenever the catharsis moment comes in, even if your chord structure is the same, and the only thing that got added is the bass line, is enough to tell the story. but it's a great point. Any recommendations on building sound design process that inspire an improvisatory or free flowing nature? So I think one thing that I forgot to mention because of the constraint of time is that whatever I'm talking about, right, happens when you're not doing the work. Which is why I think at one point I mentioned that whatever we do outside of our sound design project kind of influence what we will do when we are given a project, right? So I think when it comes to processes, the best way to do it is to make it as part of your mindset. If at all you have a mindset that yes, uh, to communicate a happy sound, this is one strategy that you will use. Whenever that moment comes and when you have to design that sound, all of those insights will kick in immediately. Otherwise, in the starting, it's a hard and fast rule. For me, I have not personally found a good way of doing it. But Saad, Memon, if at all you can figure out a way, please do let me know as well. I'm happy to learn that. But as of now, this is what my limited experience allows me to inform you. There's a question up from Suraj. Hey Suraj, hi, great to see you here. Oh, by the way, Suraj has also been one of the person who has shaped the way that my mindset about the essence of sound has improved. So shout out to Suraj. How important is communication part in sound design? Since beginner sound designers are more connected about polishing their audio craft, but other skills usually do not get that attention, like communication, documentation, as well as building healthy relation with colleagues. I think that's one of the biggest aspects, and I see where you're coming from. And I think while we have slightly discussed this in the past, I think it's important to mention for everybody else is that communication is something that will define whether or not what you have in your minds will actually come to life. And it happens a lot with sound design more than music, because when it comes to music, generally the workflow is that the director of the film or the IP or the brand or the game will have a lot of discussions with the music composer. And we have seen a lot of behind the scenes of this as well. On YouTube, you can find that. But it's rare to see a director and a sound designer have communication. And I think the way and the only way to make that happen is for the sound designers to take the initiative, because the director already has faith in sound designers' work. They know that they will do the best job, but sometimes that faith can also mean that they will not have a one-on-one interaction. So if at all you are in a setup where you're working on a brand, but you have till date not talked to a specific the owner of the brand, the owner of the company, for example, what their vision for the product is, I would suggest to figure out a way to make a communication happen, because it can give you clarity about what not to do in your sound design. What kind of music or genre inspire you in your creative process? I think I personally, I'm a huge Mike Shinoda fan, and over the years, I personally have also kind of realized that I don't have preference of any genre. So if at all there is a music track which starts with an Indian classical music and transitions into progressive rock, and if it sounds good, there wouldn't be anyone happier than me. So I think I, in a way, like fusion if you want to like box it in a genre, but I don't really have a preference. As long as something sounds good, I like it. Same goes for sound. I don't necessarily like the sound of a bird, for example. I also have started to like the sound of traffic, for the very reasons that I explained in this session. Thank you so much, Fernando, for asking that question. I think we can take a few more questions if anybody wants to mention anything about what your favorite sound was or what you experienced when it comes to feeling sounds, right? I mean, like for example, if I say school bell, most of you will consider school bell with happiness, right? Because irrespective of when it plays, it means a break. It means either that the class has concluded, or the school itself has concluded, or there's lunchtime, or there's recess, or something like that. So school bell is a very positively it's a happiness giving sound effect. Although a very similar sound when it is in your phone as your alarm tone, it starts to annoy you, right? Very similar sounds, not too different, but it depends on which age of life are you listening to it, right? So yeah, I mean, those were the happy times, yes, for sure. I see there are 21 people still hanging around. If any of you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer. But again, like I said, this is not the end of the discussion. I would really like this to continue forward, this discussion to continue forward. So I'll just put the link in the chat as well, in case you all want to have a quick access to it. Okay, so this is the link where you can find the presentation that I have explained and everything else. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time. I hope this gave you some insights. Shout out again to the Airwiggles team for inviting me and for hosting this brilliant session that's going on. And I look forward to seeing all of you again in some messages on Airwiggles or through a one-on-one session. And yeah, with that, let's have a conclusion of this session. Thanks so much. I'll wait for everybody else to drop off just in case anybody else has a question. So feel free to drop off. Thank you.